What the government had control over was the supply of money going into this crisis. So if you want to stop inflation, you shouldn't be doing quantitative easing or printing money in order to try and stimulate the economy when it didn't need stimulating. But fundamentally, all inflation relates to that. But the underlying crisis is a supply shock. So we've had the supply shock of the pandemic return, people coming back, spending more money, supply chains adjusting across the world to that. And we had the shock of the Ukraine war, which has been particularly important in respect of energy prices. We have a regional gas market and wheat prices because the Ukraine and Russia are responsible for about 30% of world trade. And clearly, those things are beyond the government's control. But they could have prepared for some of these things a bit better. Domestically, for example, they could have ended the moratorium on fracking in 2019, which means that we'd have more local supplies. They could have built up gas reserves, which means they would be able to control more of what we're putting on the market locally during the winter. So the things they could have done, but the things they didn't do, they essentially left themselves vulnerable to the movements of global markets over which they have no control.
I mean, Peter, would you broadly agree with that, you know, the government have been caught napping perhaps, or they could have been better prepared, put things away for a rainy day, fuel, for example, energy reserves, or do you think it goes deeper than that?
Well, I think we have heard quite a common sense analysis, but of course it does go deeper, because if you look at the contributors to the cost of living crisis, that's a national insurance contribution rise, so a tax rise, petrol's increasing, household energy bills, food, and of course the cost of a mortgage. Now the Bank of England base rate has risen. On the face of it, those could sound like terribly unfortunate force majeure that come out of nowhere, but lots of them do go back to government action or inaction, as we've just heard, because if you don't invest in your energy infrastructure, for example, or build up your gas reserves, then the cost goes up, or the price goes up, and you become more dependent on overseas nations. Similarly, if you don't invest in your food capacity, you become reliant on other countries. And obviously, you know, there used to be this great phrase of America that if America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Well, we're seeing that in Ukraine, a horrific war, but Ukraine is such a big grain producer that the economic impact of that is beyond just Ukraine, Russia and oil. It's grain as well. So food prices are going to carry on going up. And we had what was described as an apocalyptic scenario from the Bank of England governor yesterday. So I feel very strongly that all the driving factors of inflation, which is going to hit 10%, are not force majeure. They go back to government inaction.